Hi, I'm Deanna Springer with a fun Stitch It Sisters quilting project. First, we'll introduce our Stitch It Sisters guest, Jill Repp. You may know Jill as the host of many June Tailor project inspiration videos. Welcome back to Stitch It Sisters, Jill.
Thank you, Deanna. It's always great to be here, particularly when I get to work with Team NZP, and today because I have such a fun project to show you.
Let's take a look at the project we're making today. We'll be stitching our Quilt As You Go sewing machine cover and caddy with beautiful Caribbean Valley Batik fabrics by Benartex. We're using June Tailor's Magic Seam Wand, glue stick, Quilter Starch Savvy, and basting spray. Schmetz Chrome Quilting Needles size 90, Clover's 6-in-1 Stick and Stitch Seam Guide, and our Bernina B770 sewing machine with dual feed and knee lift. Before making our Quilt As You Go sewing machine cover and caddy, let's review what's in the package.
In addition to the instructions, there's going to be 2 pieces of printed batting. That's the fun part of Quilt As You Go because the pattern is printed right on the batting. So there'll be one for the cover and one printed batting for the caddy. This is 80/20 cotton poly batting. You'll also get a piece of cotton webbing, and that's what we're going to use to make the handle for the sewing machine cover.
What's not included in the packaging is the fabrics. You're the designer. You choose the fabrics that you'd like to make your sewing machine cover and caddy from. We've chosen the Caribbean Valley Batiks by Benartex. But the first thing we always do is head to that ironing board and spray starch your fabrics and prepare them for the sewing process.
We're going to use Starch Savvy today. This is actually a man-made formula that stiffens fabrics. With each application, it'll make the fabric just a little bit stiffer, so much easier to sew with and to press open. Now that our fabrics are pressed, we're going to go to the batting. This is the piece of batting you're going to get for the sewing machine cover. And you're going to notice that there's actually 3 different dotted lines on here. The sizes are listed here. So for a smaller sewing machine, you're going to use the large dashed line. For a medium-sized machine, the dots. And for a larger machine, you're going to use the dashed dot line. So measure the width of your machine, select a size, and then what you're going to do is cut the batting, leaving about a 1/2 inch beyond the size that you chose. For today, we're going to make the smallest size, so I'll be using the large dashed line, but I'm going to trim about a 1/2 inch away from there.
We need a little bit of that batting to work with.
Absolutely. And then your second piece of batting is going to be for the caddy. So that's what this one looks like. Here are all of our fabrics nice and starched and ready to go. So let's set these aside for a moment and talk about our cover. It's been cut out now, and we want to attach it to our backing fabric. So this is actually going to be the inside of the sewing machine cover. So to attach the batting, the wrong side of the batting to the wrong side of the fabric, we're going to use our quilt basting spray. And this is a great formula of basting spray because it has a really fine mist. It's odorless, it's colorless, and the best thing is it doesn't gum your needle, nor does the tip ever clog. So we're going to attach that using our basting spray.
And that's great to work with. And you spray that on the back of the batting.
Always spray on the back of the batting versus the fabric.
Backing, or in this case, it's lining.
It's the lining.
Inside.
Correct. When that's done, what you're going to do is make a stitching line all the way around the outside edge, right on the size of your sewing machine. We're going to stitch, and that's just going to hold that edge in place securely.
You're basting that batting to the backing fabric, and you're just setting the machine for a basting stitch. So lengthen your stitch length to a 3.0 or 4.0 even, and stitch all the way around all the edges, and then you know it's attached.
It's attached, and if you want to use a contrast fabric or a contrast thread in your bobbin, you can, because later this is going to be our line that we're going to use for trimming.
Great.
So once all that is done, we're going to take our starched pieces and we will start out by putting piece 1 in position number 1.
Right. In the directions, your directions, Jill, for each of your Quilt As You Go projects, talk about how to cut each shape, what size they are, and how many to cut. So it's all included in the directions.
It is, and a lot of these are 2.5 inch strips. So if you have a jelly roll at home, it's perfect for this project.
Great.
Piece number 1 is where we start. That just needs to stay in place until we're ready to stitch. We like to use this glue stick because it goes on purple so you can kind of see where it is, but it dries clear. So we're putting our piece 1 right into position and essentially kind of gluing it in place. Piece number 2 goes together with piece number 1, right sides together and raw edges even on our placement line. This placement line is what you see here between 1 and 2. It's not a stitching line, it is a placement line. Put your fabrics together, and then we're going to stitch in a scant 1/4 inch away from that placement line.
So using your 1/4 inch quilting foot is a great place for that presser foot. It's ideal. Those scant 1/4 inch seams and that presser foot make a great combination for your seams, because when you open this, you need to cover that next line or meet that next line.
It should land on position number 2. So let's see. So we've got that sewn here. There's our scant 1/4 inch. And so I'm going to flip that up, and that should land right on this next placement line. So now we need to press our seam allowance open, but we've starched our fabrics, so they're easy to press. You can either finger press, or we like to use our magic seam wand. This is a fun little gadget. It's made out of wood, and it's got a couple angled edges on, and this gets that seam nice and flat. If you're having trouble getting it flat, you can even take the angled end and just set it against your iron, heat it up a little bit. Wood is such a good retainer of heat. Heat it up a little bit, and then get that seam nice and flat. Now we're ready for piece number 3. So right sides together and raw edges even. We're going to put that in between 1 and 3 right on our placement line like this, and we're going to sew in a 1/4 inch.
We're painting by numbers or quilting by the numbers.
Sew by number, right? So here's our piece number 3. Let's flip that down, and then again we're going to take our magic seam wand and we are going to get that seam nice and flat. And then we're going to continue on and do this whole section with 4, 5, 6, 7. You can see they're every other one top to bottom.
They're all numbered. Every section is numbered. You've started in the middle and you're working out.
You're working toward the outside edges. So now we've got our center completely pieced. Everything is nice and flat. And we're now working on these strips onto the sides. So we'll take these strips and right sides together here and here, and we'll sew in that 1/4 inch. And then when these flip open, they will land right on the line.
So these are longer strips, but it's the same method.
Same process all the way through. All right, so now we've got the entire thing ready to go, and we're ready to work on our handle. So let's get out our pieces for our handle. Everything else is completed on the top. And what we're going to do for our handle is we start out by cutting our strip of fabric like this. And the next step is we're going to press in a 1/2 inch on each side.
And that's where I like to use Clover's hot ruler. It's just press under to that 1/2 inch line, and then you have both short ends pressed under.
And we've got that done here, so you can see our ends are pressed under here. Next, what we're going to do is take this and fold it in half and make another press line here. That is how we find the center.
So you've made a crease right in the center.
Made a crease in the center. That's done here. And then what we're going to do is open it back up, and we're going to fold in the raw edges toward that reference center line like this.
So meeting that cut edge right in the center.
Perfect.
And we're pressing at the ironing board.
So let's show you what that looks like now that is done. And then what we're going to do is insert our cotton webbing right inside there. So here it is hidden in there.
And you just placed it right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
So basically, you're creating a designer handle. That cotton webbing is inside of your fabric.
You can't see it.
Custom created for your sewing machine cover.
And then what we like to do is just stitch all around the edge. And I've got that done here. Handle is done. And that can then go into position. So that's going to be centered right on your sewing machine cover area.
And then you just stitch. You stitch a square and stitch an X as a reinforcement, and that's attached. Your handle's attached.
Your handle is attached. The next thing we're going to do is let's turn this over to the back and get our scissors. Because what we want to do now is trim out these areas in here, which is where our gusset is going to be. We'll just show you on one side how we trim that out.
That's what makes that shape, so you have some depth to your sewing machine cover. So that gusset is just making a little seam. So there'll be a side seam and a second seam that we call a gusset seam that makes it the width to your cover. If you just sewed the two side seams, you'd have a really slim, almost like a laptop cover. So we need a gusset for the depth of the machine.
So now that that gusset is trimmed out and everything is trimmed out, we're going to sew the sides, right sides together. And let's clip those first, Deanna, so that we can kind of show you how this is going to look. We'll sew the side seams on both sides.
So imagine that is stitched.
That's going to leave this opening right here. So what we're going to do with this, it's super easy. Just flip it the opposite direction, like this. Refold it the opposite direction. And we're going to stitch right across the top.
It naturally wants to fold right to that gusset, and then you'd stitch that seam.
Now,
so stitch side seams and then stitch gusset.
Prior to doing that, if you want to zigzag the edges, you can, because you're going to be taking this cover on and off a lot. Or I've got one right here where we can show you. So we actually zigzagged the seams, then we did our seam allowance.
A great spot to use your serger too, but do it when it's flat.
When it's flat. And then let's just turn this over so you can see this is after we had sewn the side, we pulled the opposite direction and just stitched across here. And that's what creates that gusset. So we've got that done on both sides. And then we're ready to turn right sides out.
It went from looking like a table runner to a sewing machine cover shape.
And our handle had been attached, so that's already out there. And we'll turn that right sides out. And then what we're going to do next is simply bind the bottom.
So this one you already have the binding in place. And you can use your favorite binding method, but you always start with 2.5-inch strips.
We start with 2.5-inch strips, cut straight a grain, fold in half, press. And then what we typically do is sew it on the wrong side, bring it to the front side, and stitch it in place with your beautiful batik binding fabric.
And it's all coordinated. That's it. The sewing machine cover is finished, complete, lined. It's quilted as you go, so all 3 layers are attached.
It's gorgeous.
So what if we want to make a coordinating table mat caddy?
So for the caddy, the system works the same way, and these already have been starched. Everything's ready to go. The same type of system, we start out by gluing piece number 1 and piece number 2, and we continue on in that same manner. It looks
very familiar.
Yes, all the same.
You've selected a different fabric for this one.
Well, I'll show you why. Now that this is complete, basically when you make this, you piece all of your strips together with this was our backing fabric, and you bind. So it's like making a little quilt. And then you have a decision to make, because what we're going to do is we're going to either have this pieced area under our sewing machine and flip up the pretty batik for the pocket, or we're going to do just the opposite, and we're going to say, this is where my sewing machine is going to sit, and this is where my pocket is going to be. And we thought that was a much better look.
I like that. And I know from reading your directions that you folded up 6 inches.
We folded up 6 inches.
So we just set our Clover's 5-in-1 sliding gauge to 6 inches.
To 6 inches
Line
here.
those edges up, and then you have a pocket.
You have a
pocket. So your sewing machine is sitting here, and this is draping over the front of the table.
This is draping over the table, and it's really super easy. You just want to stitch along the sides, and that's going to hold it in place. And then look at what your sewing tools are, and say, I want 4 pockets, or I want 3 pockets. 1 to fit my scissors, 1 for my notions, 1 for your glue stick or whatever, and make as many seam lines in here as you want pockets.
Sure, great. And I know that you make your center pocket larger for your chocolate bars.
Yes, I do, because I like to eat candy when I sew.
I would sew both seams, so I have my marking pen handy right here.
Exactly. So look at what you've got in your notions area, sew accordingly, and you will have a gorgeous, jazzed up sewing room with your matching sewing machine cover and caddy.
It's beautiful, Jill, and you'll be the envy of all your sewing and quilting friends. I know they'll ask you to make them each a matching sewing machine case and caddy.
I'll do it. I love it.
We hope you've enjoyed this Stitch It Sisters project. You'll find this Quilt As You Go machine cover and caddy project, along with a limited number of project bundle boxes at StitchItSisters.com. Be sure to tune in again for another Stitch It Sisters sewing adventure. In the meantime, connect with Stitch It Sisters and friends on our social sites. Stitch It Sisters is made possible by Bernina, Clover, Benertex Fabrics, June Tailor, OESD Oklahoma Embroidery Supply and Design, and shopnzp.com.
Bernina, made to create.